Amazing. Awesome. Well, I'm going to kick us off. And as individuals enter into the room, we will welcome them into the conversation. I've said it already, but again, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Ask Me Anything event series hosted by Diversify by Design. I am Alasia Brown, Community Manager at D by D, and I'm super excited to be in conversation tonight with Omari Souza. Now, I just mentioned Diversify by Design, also known as D by D. You'll hear me go back and forth between the two. And some of you may know a ton about D by D, while some of you may know nothing about the coalition. And we are perfectly okay with that. But while we have you, we'd love to tell you more about the coalition and why we even decided to develop an AMA series in the first place. So, Diversify by Design is a coalition of organizations and individuals that joined forces in 2021 to create a more racially diverse and inclusive design industry. One of our critical goals is to create opportunities for historically excluded young people to learn about design and connect with successful designers. And in that spirit, D by D's AMA series was developed. The D by D AMA series serves as a platform for designers who champion diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging to answer questions about their career trajectory, life experiences, and the things that they've dedicated their careers to creating. And with that, we are super excited and delighted to welcome you to tonight's Ask Me Anything event. And I say and pause a little bit because you go by so many different things, Omari. You have so many different realms of experience and expertise. So we are joined by professor, design researcher, podcaster, change maker, and most importantly tonight, author of the newly released book, Design Against Racism, Creating Work That Transforms Communities, Omari Souza. Thank you for being in conversation with us tonight.
Thank you guys for having me.
We're always excited to have you.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody watches or used to watch In Living Color, but whenever people introduce me, I always feel like I'm meeting the Jamaican stereotype of having like infinity jobs. Uh, so
In the best way possible, though, if you're going to have title after title, professor, podcaster, author, those are the multi hyphenates that you want. So,
yes, ma'am.
and this is a part two. We had a conversation earlier this year just about the work that you've been doing in general. And months ago, you were like, I will be having a book coming out way in October. We're way in October already. And so we're in conversation tonight to learn more about you, the work that you've just done this year in general. I always tell people this is an Ask Me Anything. So while I have some conversations to anchor the conversation and to ensure that we continue rolling, it's important that you all participate, that you come off of mute. Risha, shout out to you for being on video. If you're off video, I respect that. I love that. But also we appreciate you all just being in conversation with us. This isn't just a conversation between myself and Omari. So definitely come off mute and get into that conversation. But before we get into all of the things, I am going to hop into the book of it all because that's kind of what led us to this second conversation this year. Can you tell us more about the book? For those of us who have no context at all, tell us more.
Yeah, so the book Design Against Racism was inspired by a number of things. I am a graduate of the Cleveland Institute of Art. I grew up in New York City, but went to grad school and undergrad in Ohio. And I went to Cleveland Institute of Art for my undergraduate degree and was the last of the 5 year program. After that, they got rid of it. But during that time period, I left the diversity of New York City and went to an institution where there wasn't many. Cleveland happened to be a very diverse city. However, the institution itself didn't have much diversity, so much so that out of everyone within the 5 year program, when we all graduated, all of us that started together, I was the only graduating Black male. Not for my major, but for the program itself. I was the only graduating Black male with only one additional. So there were a lot of questions that I had, both in terms of perspectives that dealt with the intersections of race and practice that I felt like the books that were made available to me didn't have, in addition to understandings of how history overlapped with design practice. A lot of the books that I read treated design as its own individual island, as if it was separated from things that were happening in the world during particular time periods. And there were also adages that were used in courses like design does no harm and all of these phrases that I curse, so forgive me, but I felt were bullshit. So for me, it began this long investigation. My thesis in grad school was around issues of diversity in design and where Black designers were going, or where students of color were going, if not, matriculating through design programs, and finding out that a lot of Black students, in particular, traditionally picks majors that give them higher social return on investment versus financial. They want the majors that help them advocate for themselves or for family members or friends that have experienced trauma that they felt moved by, and went to the majors that helped them contextualize that trauma and or gave them tools to resolve it. For me, that was also interesting considering a lot of the majors they would go to. Those majors influenced particular design research practices that a lot of designers leverage today. However, we do it without consideration of people in the same way that social surveying practices do. So I spent several years post grad school reading a lot more about some of these social science practices, reading a lot more about discussions and criticisms of those practices and where they fell short, and wanting to find a way to really introduce a more nuanced perspective on how we leverage those methodologies into our day-to-day practice. And some of that I ended up finding work by Zora Neale Hurston, who before her time as a playwright during the Harlem Renaissance was an anthropology student at Columbia University. And her book, The Last Barracoon, specifically, was her attempt to tell the story and perform research on the last living slave that was brought to the United States after the abolition of slavery. But her mission was, how do I tell the story of a marginalized person without further marginalizing their identity? And how do I do it in a way that's both restorative to his identity, to the culture that he came from, but also the humanity that he felt was stripped from him? And to me, that's when the light bulb went off. Not to quote Eddie Murphy from Coming to America, but it was the aha moment where, from that point, it was like, this is what design needs. It needs to figure out a way to identify harm, measure what that harm is, but also figure out ways in which it can restore trust with the people that we're designing for, restore humanity to people that it's been stripped from, but also find a way to make these solutions so that they scale over time. And that was the inspiration for the book.
Yeah, I love that. There's still so many things that you said during the AMA. I think it was back in February of this year that you did. One of them I will never forget. I feel like the entire room kind of had like a moment when you were talking about how things as simple as like when you go to wash your hands and the sensors may not acknowledge certain skin colors, and about how there's race at hand in that type of design. And something else that you talked about that stuck with me during that conversation was about how more designers should be authors. And I just that was another moment where I was like, tell me more. And we talked about how there just aren't enough. You talked about a lot of other reasons why, but I remember that being one of them. I say all of that to say that makes me think at some point you were going to write a book, just because that feels like your thought path about there aren't enough of us doing it. Why now at this point in your career? You could have done it 5 years ago. You could have waited another 10 years. I know some people, they're like, I'm going to write a book this date, and it might be 15, 20, 25 years from now when they feel like they've learned enough or they've done enough. Why now at this point in your career did you decide it was time to like write and publish the book?
I mean, I think it's always easy for someone to say, like, write a book. And I'm saying that about myself and my own criticisms, but you have to convince a publisher to publish what it is that you're writing. And sometimes publishers may agree with what it is that you're producing, and sometimes it may take a little bit more negotiation or time in order to get them to give the sign off. I think if for me now, if I have momentum in my career where publishers may sit with me now to talk about particular things, and I have perspectives and things to contribute to the discussion, it would be irresponsible of me not to. Being honest, people that contribute to writing, we don't make a lot of money off of the publication, but it's still something that pushes the dialogue. Um, I think for a lot of designers, we work on passion projects. We will freelance or we'll do something creative in our own free time and then share it. And that may motivate other people to follow similar visual tropes that we use and things of that nature. But the reality of the situation is what we create then becomes short-lived. But when you publish a book, that book lives outside of what the design looks like. It lives longer than the designer themselves. And a lot of times people will reference that discussion. So for me, whenever I think of people writing, I think of outgroup identities. You know, if my race puts me in an outgroup based off of Western society, your gender will put you as an outgroup in Western society because of its over, allegiance to not patriotism. The word left me, but it's
Patriarchy,
patriarchy. Yes, perfect.
Which
Um,
seems to
uh,
be synonymous with patriotism, but
These days.
I
yeah,
digress.
yeah. But if we think about all of the outgroup identities that exists within the smelting pot that we call the United States, and how few of those outgroup identities get an opportunity to write about design from their perspectives, there's a lot of nuance that we're actually missing, and a lot of rehashing of discussions that are being had. I don't know how many times I've gone to a bookstore and there's a new book on the Bauhaus movement, or there's a new book on the Swiss style of design, when in reality, the innovations that we could be having could be motivated by someone who is writing about being on the spectrum and how that influences their design approach, or their physical disabilities, and how due to what one may view as a physical limitation may be advantageous in how they approach things. So for me, when I think of people writing books, I think of all of the discussions and conversations that could be had that people aren't having, either because they internally don't feel like it's worth sharing, or because they don't have the confidence in having a microphone and sharing it. But I feel like design needs it in order to have growth, which I don't feel like we've had.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if y'all heard that, but if there's something in you that's like, I feel like I have a book on the inside of me, I don't know, that might be your sign. I don't know. Um, one other question that I have for you, is that you've described the book, and also I'm going to say this, be thinking about your questions if you're listening, everyone. Like I said, I take it seriously that it's not just a conversation between Omari and I. It's a conversation between all of us and Omari. So get your questions ready. While you're doing that, I'm going to ask Omari one more. You've described the book as reimagining how design can serve justice. Justice is a huge word. Justice in 2025 is beyond me. We could go on and on. So you've described the book as reimagining how design can serve justice. What does that look like in practice?
It looks like a number of different things. I think for one of the things that I talk about a lot with or I attempt to set up in the early stages of the book is the idea that design is something that curates culture. It influences culture, how we exchange, how we discuss things with one another. And I just play along with me for a second. One thing that I do to showcase that with audiences is sometimes I'll ask them to play telephone with me. So I'll go ring, 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 and I just want you to pretend to pick the phone up. Okay.
Okay.
Ring, ring, ring.
Hello.
Oh no, is that you don't hold anything up?
Hello.
Okay. So look at how you held your hand, look at how Risha held her hand, and look at how Andrea held her hand, right? All of these feel indicative of older phones that were landlines. There's the receiver, there's the mic. But if you were to ask any of my students who are 18, 19, whenever you ask them to pick up the phone, they do this, right? Because their entire existence They've lived during a window of time where smartphones were ubiquitous, and they probably never seen a landline. If you were to ask my grandmother what calling somebody would look like, she would probably do this with a rotary phone. But even in those instances, that simple gesture kind of showcases how the design of technology influences how we communicate with one another. I think for designers, we have to move beyond segmented definitions of what design is. Graphic designers design it as one thing based off practice. Industrial designers, UX designers, off of their professional perspectives. When in reality, design is just anything that's artificial that augments, curates, or amplifies human existence. And once we understand that, like how we set up what table we choose to have dinner, the utensils that we use, all of these are designed experiences and artifacts to assist us. We then have to think about what are the implications of the things that we are designing. Who are the in groups and out groups that'll be sitting with these design pieces, and are the artifacts that we create giving equal treatment to these in and out group identities, or do they marginalize anyone in particular? One thing I consistently use as an example is concerts and sporting events. And I'll ask my students, men and women, to in silos draft out their journey map of their bathroom experiences. And I'll then ask the cisgendered men in the classroom to share, to which it's 3 to 5 steps. I get up, walk to the bathroom, find the urinal, wash my hands, go back to my seat, right? If they remember to wash their hands. For the women, it ranges from 8 to 30 steps sometimes, maybe more. Get up, navigate the crowd, find a stall. If the stall is big enough for me, is there a place for me to hang my purse? Is the person on their cycle with child, currently lactating, the complexity of the outfit, the complexity of the outfit and returning it after using the bathroom, all of these other pieces. And then I'll ask cisgendered men in the room to raise your hand, to which they will. And I'll say, drop your hand if you feel that prior to women sharing these steps, that you would not have been able, share this if now that you're aware of the additional steps, that you feel without them sharing that, you'd have been able to equitably design a bathroom experience for them. So which they all lower their hands. I'll then ask the women to raise their hands and ask the same question, to which they keep their hands up because they're confident they can design for themselves. But then I'll ask them, what if the woman you're designing for is trans? Or what if she's disabled? Or what if she comes from a section of the world where the flushing mechanism on the toilet is different than what it is in the United States? Do you still feel confidence? Which everyone drops their hands. And I use this as a way of articulating that we all have positionalities, and in those positionalities, there are intersections of identities. And even when we are a part of an outgroup, we still have in-group identities, and there's still spectrums on what those outgroup identities can look like. And if you don't design and account for those things, you can be creating a number of experiential bottlenecks for the people that are there. So when we're talking about designing for justice, we're talking about thinking about those experiential bottlenecks. If as a male, and my male identity puts me in an out group, even though my race puts me as my male identity puts me in an in group, even though my race puts me as an out group. If I don't account for my experiential blind spots, and if I don't utilize frameworks in order to help me identify and see those so that I can establish strategies on how I'm going to overcome them, I can end up designing a bathroom experience for women that now creates greater harm. If as a designer of a car, or someone whose responsibility is to test that vehicle for safety, if I'm not accounting for the anatomical differences between women and men, especially in my crash test dummy selection, I can now be designing a vehicle that in the case of a car accident becomes far safer for men that fall within the height and weight of the crash test dummy versus women who anatomically will be a little bit different, hence why women have greater injury rates and fatality rates post-car accidents. So for me, designing for justice is really looking at the frameworks, looking at the things that we say design does, realizing that we've actually just been practicing design as a trade without critical thinking, and then interjecting the methodologies that we could be using to fill the gaps that we currently have.
Design as a trade versus design as justice. I will never be able to go to the restroom in the same way again. Thank you, Omari, for that. While we have this little break, I'd love to know anyone who has been listening so far, are there any comments, questions, just anything that's come to mind throughout the conversation? Andrea.
Omari, first of all, thanks for
Hey,
being here tonight.
thank you
Um,
for having me.
yeah, of course. So after you talked about the bathroom experience, right, and the phone experience, when you, as I haven't read the book yet, I will, but when you sat down to title this book, tell us about the title, Design Against Racism versus Design for Justice. So I don't know the contents of the book yet, but
Yeah.
but I want to hear more
So the
about.
title was actually chosen by the publisher.
Okay.
All of
Okay.
my titles were, I was told they were too poetic and they weren't like direct enough. The original title of the book was God's Gonna Trouble the Water. That was my original proposal because the storytelling mechanisms that I used in the book were based on the lament and sorrow songs of Negro spirituals. They often begin with deep sorrow and tragedy, but then end with hope. And that's basically how the book is framed. It talks about history, the ways in which design has failed, which I don't write it in a way that should be triggering, but for many people it is heavy. But then I end it with case studies and examples of what could be done to improve. Um, the publisher felt that no one was going to know what the book was about just from that title. And then I chose the title of restorative design as one of the frameworks in the book that inspired it was restorative justice, to which they also felt that it wouldn't be direct enough. And they felt the title Design Against Racism would be punchy enough to actually get people to purchase books. And since they're in the business of selling books and I just write, I just said, okay, I'll trust you. And it's been going
Thank
good so
you.
far. No
Thank you.
problem.
Although I like the first title myself
Yeah.
a lot.
I did too. I was really excited about it when I came up with it. And they were like, no. And I was just like, all right, whatever.
Right.
Well, thank
Anyone else would love to hear from you. Just any thoughts that maybe you've had as we've been in conversation tonight. Any questions that have maybe come to mind? Not yet? All
I have
right.
a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Risha.
Thank you, cousin. So with your work as a professor, what is something that you and the young designers struggle with to see eye to eye?
Um, a lot of things. All right. Have you ever done martial arts?
Karate.
Karate? All right. Have you ever heard the phrase McDojo?
Yeah.
All right. So for the people in the room that have not done martial arts or who have and never heard of the phrase McDojo, a McDojo is the over franchising of martial arts institutions that attempt to matriculate students through a program fairly quickly in order to keep the dojo in business. So they'll every 6 weeks there's a test for a belt stripe or a belt promotion, yada 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 yada. And within 3 to 4 years, anyone can start and then become a black belt regardless of competency. It's just as long as you're paying for the test and you're paying for your membership, you can matriculate through the program. Your ability to defend yourself hasn't increased. Your confidence maybe, but your ability hasn't necessarily increased, but you matriculate through. I think the thing that I struggle with a lot of universities is that they're McDojo programs, right? Um, with McDojo programs, in order to push people through, you abandon rigor and you abandon the difficult things that may make people quit due to the fact that you want to graduate them within a particular time period. And not that I don't think students should graduate and matriculate through. But I think because you're stripping away the difficulty that's there sometimes, students lose the ability to be they lose perseverance when things get difficult. Um, and a lot of times the professors treat the classes as a waiter would when serving a meal versus someone that's there to intentionally challenge you. And I think the challenging aspect of academe is the thing that I struggle with, because as a professor, it's not my responsibility in my mind to teach you what to think. And it's also not my responsibility solely to teach you how to design well. What is my responsibility is to teach you how not to accept anything that people are telling you, and for you to be able to think critically of what's being said to you and how to validate and verify whether or not the information is appropriate. So if I tell you that, hey, this is the design standard, you need to do it this way, don't take my word for it. I tell my students all the time, everything is an assumption until it's validated. So even if you're hearing it from the professor, I can say something as if it's fact, but until you validate it, it's an assumption. And I think the extra layer of labor and the extra requirement for them, especially for the TikTok generation where information comes quickly and you don't have to do any of the background research, does become hard. I think when you place additional rigor or new ways of doing things that force more responsibility on the students versus the way that a lot of other professors hand feed, that also becomes difficult for the institution as well. Because again, similar to McDojos, they simply want to get them in and out and get a new batch of students. That way they can keep the money flowing. And I think especially being with one of my hats, the organizer of the State of Black Design, when I have conversations with employers, a lot of times their criticisms of students is that they're really good at making pretty things, but they're really terrible at producing strategy or coming up with something of substance, because they don't have that muscle of thinking critically and asking difficult questions. Yeah.
Thank you for that question, Risha. And like I mentioned, we have had some questions come in. We're asking questions regarding the book, but we're also asking questions in general that people have asked, because this isn't Ask Me Anything after all. And so during registration, a student from SFSU asked, how do you go about implementing activism into your art?
I don't create much anymore.
That was going to
So
be my next question. I'm like just thinking about the professor of it all, the podcast of it all, the state of Black design of it all. I'm like, I haven't said a lot about what you've created lately.
no, I'm more of a researcher now than I am a maker. And when I do have creative outlets, it's normally photography. Um, and I don't even necessarily think I do anything with the intention of being 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 anything but myself. I guess that's the thing. The thing that I can think of, there's a book I read one time called Hair Story, and it was this history of the perception of Black women and their hair. And in the one of the arguments of the chapters was during the 1970s, the insistence of just wearing your hair naturally, the way it grew out of your head, without adding additional chemicals or attempting to straighten it, was perceived as political. And I think for me, if I go by Melissa Harris Perry, who's a former MSNBC contributor, but also an author, who also wrote a book that was inspired by Zora Neale Hurston called Sister Citizen, she defines politics as anything that's done that directs attention from one thing to the next. So if I get you to pay more attention to what's in my left hand versus my right hand, that within itself is political. I think for me, I'm not necessarily attempting to do anything with the idea of protest or anything of that nature. what I'm attempting to do is write along the lines of things that are interesting to me, from an authentic standpoint. But the idea of writing about the materials, but the idea that what's of interest to me is my outgroup identities and the intersection of other identities that also happen to fall within outgroups. And because of the fact that those aren't things that are normally in discussion, it causes people to deviate their perspectives, and that becomes political. So it's not my intention to protest, or it's not my mission to do those things. What my mission is to have conversations along the lines of things that I'm interested in. I think it becomes protest when it starts to make other people feel uncomfortable, but I'm not necessarily writing for those people, and I'm not necessarily writing with the intention of making anyone uncomfortable. I just feel like it's important for me to expand the conversations that are being had.
Gotcha. Gotcha. I love that. I actually have a follow-up question, but before I do
Mhm.
that, I want to pause. Does anyone have any comments, questions? Omari just said a lot of really good, cool things, and so I'm taking it all in. I'm sure that you all are as well. But wanted to pause and ask, does anybody have any comments?
Hey, Mari, I've got a question.
Hey.
Thank you for all that you've shared so far and for writing. It's a huge endeavor to do. I can imagine it's a vulnerable thing to do in some ways. I'd love to
Yeah.
hear a little bit more, just hearing about the almost negotiations on the title. If you have other experiences of feeling like you were pushed in negative or positive ways, right? That there's a bit of a negotiation with the writing process. Just any kind of reflections you have on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think not necessarily. I think the book that I with the book that I wrote, both this one and the prior book, the anthology with Teresa, I feel like the publishers were both very supportive. I think the information and feedback that they gave were just focused primarily on how can we get units out of stores, which I felt were okay. I think for me, I would have loved to have gone with the original title. But if it would have led to no one reading the material on the inside of the book, it probably would have done a disservice to it. And with the name that they chose, they still gave me an opportunity to, say no to it or propose something else. I just didn't have a problem with it. I didn't have a problem with the title that they had. Um, I think for me, I just wanted something a little bit more flowery. I don't know why my tongue isn't working right now, but I guess it made sense from a business standpoint to keep it simple.
Thank you for that question, Ashley. We appreciate it. I am always kind of like channeling these questions from people, but I'm like, I don't ever get to ask my own questions. So I'm going to be a little selfish right now and just squeeze in
Mhm.
my own question to you. And that is, what other books, like, what's your reading list? I feel like the last AMA, you kind of just were naming these books, and I'm like, gotta write that down, gotta write that down. You just mentioned, was it Hair Story?
Yeah, hair story.
Okay, Hair
Um,
Story. Yeah, what if you had to pick maybe your top, I don't know, 2 or 3 books that you're just like, you haven't read this? What do you mean that we need to get in addition to Design Against Racism?
so it depends on what your interest is, and the same thing I would tell my students. If the work that you're attempting to do is advocacy work, it doesn't have to follow the same reading list that I'm using,
Yeah.
because you may find something different that illuminates a blind spot that I didn't even know I had. But if we are thinking about things that I'm currently reading, um, I'm revisiting Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me. Um, James Baldwin, The Fire Next Time. I'm trying to work my way through all of Toni Morrison's work, Nikki Giovanni's work, and not many of these are social science related books. a lot of these are narratives. And the thing about authors, and like fiction-based authors, especially fiction-based authors of color or from marginalized identities, they expand conversations through story, especially considering many of their tellings don't get published until many of them make amazing careers elsewhere and they pass. Like, for example, the book that inspired this one, Last Barracoon by Zora Neale Hurston, got published decades after she died. But my bookshelf is right behind me, so I'm going to grab a couple. Give me 2 seconds.
We'd love that. It's funny you mentioned Nikki Giovanni. Most recently, I read Love Poems by Nikki Giovanni, and I didn't read it with the intention of thinking that it was any sort of a political message, but even just reading about love in that way from that author, it felt like you kind of read it and you're like, oh, this isn't just about, you know, what the title says. So yeah.
So these are a couple that I can share. Sekou Cook's Hip Hop Architecture is one of my favorites. If you're unfamiliar, Sekou Cook is a professor and practicing architect, also of Jamaican descent, similar to myself. He was able to jerry-rig a 3D printer onto a turntable and practices building and constructing spaces, but using similar techniques that DJs use to mix records in order to build spaces, which I thought was extremely interesting. There is this book, the blur is kind of crazy, but it's called The Culture, Hip Hop, and Contemporary Art of the 21st Century, which is another book. My next book idea deals a lot with how culture is influenced and changes due to design. There is and well, I always butcher the enunciation of this, but this is a book on the study of Black aesthetics, which I find to be really interesting. There are a couple of research-related books: Unequal by Design, High Stakes Testing, and the Standardization of Inequality.
Oh, wow. Can you say that one more time? I'm trying to keep a little list as you're going. And to everyone here, I'll
I'm
try and
sorry.
get this into the chat for y'all too.
It's called Unequal by Design, High Stakes Testing, and the Standardization of Inequality.
Got it.
There's another book I bought called Environmental Racism and Classism, which is a study on the construction of spaces and how that could be marginalizing. Another book, Race in Modern Architecture, which I don't know why I'm holding the books up, you can't see through the blur. And Designing for Diversity, which is also another book on race and space for architects that I find interesting. So I do a lot of pleasure reading, but also finding a lot of books on there's another book called Wade in the Water, which is another study on Negro spirituals that I'm also reading too, because as I mentioned prior, I like leveraging the story structures of Negro spirituals, like utilizing those structures in how I tell my stories for my writings.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for that. And like I said to everyone, I caught as many as I could, so I'll share those in the chat at some point. A couple more questions for you before we get ready to wrap up. What are some practical ways designers can apply lessons from your book in their day-to-day work?
Yeah, so I think understanding positionality. In the book, we talk about positionality, and I provide case studies on how I teach it to my students. But mapping your individual positionality, if you're working on a team, then mapping the team's positionality and then using that comparatively to the person and people that you're designing for. This will force you to have an understanding of the intersections of your identity, the intersections of the identity of your team, and the intersections of the identity of the people that you're designing for. So, for example, if I then hired my students who range from 17 to 21, who pick up their phone like this and tell them that, hey, you now have to design an equitable phone experience for my grandmother, whose original phone experience was, calling someone on dispatch and or using the rotary line. How would you do that? Considering the fact that there's so much of a positionality difference. And the fact that they now understand that difference and the level of or the size of that gap, they now have to come up strategically with ways in which they will overcome those differences. That's one. Two, no longer designing from an ivory tower. So in a lot of ways, designers are very hierarchical in how they approach things. I think this is good because this is what I learned in school, and I'm going to disseminate this down to the folks that aren't designers, and they have no say in this. But then realizing that there can be innovation whenever you co-design with people, even if they're not as trained classically as you are. But if you give them some say in how things are being built, you now have allotted room for them to be just as invested in what you are, and you may also find greater opportunities for your solution to scale beyond what it would have if you simply dictated to them what the design approach would be. The third piece is not being not being too rigid. There's a proverb in Jamaica that says, bend a tree when it's young, because when it's old, it'll break. Designers get very fixed in their approaches. And once they become fixed, they never want to deviate from the ways in which they've done it. I've heard designers say several times whenever I've told them, like, hey, this might not work for this audience. Well, I've been doing it this way for 20 years, or I've been doing it this way before you could walk, or whatever the case may be, because I'm still young compared to several other designers that I've met. And the reality is, it doesn't mean you've been doing it right. And it doesn't mean that you've been doing it in a way that doesn't create harm. So always being open to learn, and not just learn from other designers, but learn from practitioners outside of the design field. Again, the definition I use for design is anything that is artificial, that augments, amplifies, or curates human existence. So that is inclusive of everything. Policy is artificial. Language is artificial. The things that are engineered are artificial. It's not just from the peer review of your practice that things are influencing culture. So when you begin the process of learning from everyone that creates something artificial, and the methodologies that they're using in order to create these things, you now create room for yourself to learn and innovate your own perspectives and approaches to what it is that we're crafting.
Makes sense. I feel like I'm in the classroom right now, and I wish I had my notebook and my pen, because this is all so good. I'm so happy this is being recorded so I can go back and watch. Like I've been saying throughout this conversation, this is a great conversation for me, but it isn't just for me. And in order for it to really truly be for you all, you got to get in there, you got to ask questions, you got to, if you have any comments, we'd love to hear them. So I'm going to pause for a second and give you all an opportunity to come off of mute and to add to the conversation, whether it be a comment or a question.
Yeah, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hi. So first off, thank you for giving us your time. Appreciate that.
No problem at all. Thank you
In
for
the
sharing.
previous discussion, you spoke about how you were shopping out your book to publishers, and one of them told you no. And then that same publisher came back to you, and you told them that you already gave it to MIT.
Mhm.
And then they asked you, was there anything else that you would like to talk about? Could you tell us how you felt when they asked you that question? And also that shift of their mind changing, did you feel that was kind of performative, since it was after the George Floyd event, and how media and corporations decided to make that shift as well? Could you speak about that experience?
I mean, yeah. The reality of publishing is that only 2% of proposals that are submitted annually get selected by major publishers. Only 2%. And of that 2%, I think less than 1% happen to be Black. I felt when I got rejection, the emotion of just being rejected by something. And when the world was on fire because of the George Floyd incident and they came back around, at first it did feel like, okay, are they really interested, or are they just doing this um, just because, the publishing world has not been very kind to ideas coming from Black consumers. I mean, Black authors. Um, but that perspective changed over time because the political climate changed over time. Things have progressively gone further and further right. And with the advent of, all of these books that are being banned in different places, or pressure that's coming from different political parties, they could have easily have decided to drop my title and drop me from from their listings. And they didn't. They continued to support, and they continued to push me. And I think that's in the book. I talk a little bit about allyship versus co-conspirators. And an ally is someone who can be an heir, can be supportive, but it's normally from a distance. They normally don't have any skin in the game. And a co-conspirator, um, just for the sake of using flowery, um, not flowery in the sense of innocence, but like flowery, poetic, like representation, or just storytelling representation. If a co-conspirator could be the getaway driver if you were to rob a bank or to do something. Like, if I hop in the car after doing this, you are now just as guilty as I was. And for them to support what I was writing and still publish it anyway showed me that at least the team that believed in the book, I can't speak for the publication as a whole because I just haven't worked with everyone there. But at least the team that worked with me, they believed in it enough to be the person in the car with me, to be the co-conspirator, and to share that guilt if any of that pressure comes down on the publisher. So with that said, I can't say that they were being performative, but I can say it was a question of mine when they did return. Is this genuine and is this sincere? But I also feel like that is often a feeling question that I normally ask whenever anyone approaches me with opportunities.
Thank you for your transparency, Matt.
Oh, no worries.
We always appreciate it. And it's always interesting to just hear the other side. We get these books, we hear about these books, but we miss out on everything. We don't know what it took to kind of get to this point. So we always appreciate going behind the curtain. And I'll ask one more time. I know we're coming up on time, but again, I want to make sure people have space. Let's see, we have something in the chat. Tasnim said, the book examines how design has often reinforced exclusion or marginalization. When did you first recognize design's role in either perpetuating or dismantling racism?
I mean, I I grew up looking. So this kind of will date me. When everybody that I knew was growing up, it was a flex to have like a Britannica encyclopedia at your house. And there were families that I knew that couldn't afford to buy the entire catalog of Britannica. So what they would do is they would buy one book at a time. Um, in the book, I talk about my experience going to Catholic school for a little bit. I'm not Catholic, but I went to Catholic school because my parents wanted to put me in private school for a couple of years. And I talk about my experience at that school for kindergarten and first grade, and how every image on the wall, like from the stained glass windows on down, none of them looked like me. And while none of the priests or nuns or instructors that worked there were rude to me, the stories that they would tell me of heroism and morality and the people that would embody them, none of them looked like me. And I grew up when Saved by the Bell was a big show. And I remember telling my mom that, hey, I want to change my name from Omari to Zach. I don't know anybody named Omari, and Zach just sounds like a cool name. And my dad was like, hell no. Pulled me from the school and put me into a public school in the Boston Road, Co-op City, Gun Hill Road area of the Bronx. And my mother decided that instead of getting the Britannica books, that there was a company that was selling autobiographies of prominent Black heroes. And every month I would get a new book, and it would be my responsibility to read these books and then talk about what was inside. And for me, I would see pictures of signs in the Jim Crow South, marking where people were not allowed to use the bathroom. These signs, by design standards, use typography. There's a canvas size. It needed to go out and be printed and hung. Thought processes had to be given in terms of like wayfinding, where this was going to be, so that people had a firm understanding of what that would look like. Differences in construction around like where people could drink, bathroom setups, maps that showcased where people could and could not live, redlining. All of these things, to me, while I didn't have the language for it, these were all design artifacts. A map is designed. It's not something that's natural. The borders that we create around them also aren't natural either. So for me, I grew up fully aware that these were pieces that impacted us and impacted culture and impacted how we navigated space. But it wasn't until I got to college and started learning the language around how particular things are crafted that I was like, oh, this is design too. Why isn't this in Meg's history? Like, someone chose a typeface, and in reality, if you look at it, like, you can look at the language used during the Jim Crow South. You can look at the language used in apartheid South Africa. You can look at the language used in London during the reconstruction of London after World War II, that was used to segregate Caribbean and African migrants. A lot of the language, sometimes even the typefaces that are used, are comparable. So it's like, this is a design system that's actually being utilized in order to communicate something. Reading about the Brown versus Board of Education case and the doll test that was used to argue for the abolition of the Jim Crow South, where 2 dolls were used to test the impacts of segregation, and the fact that only white Cabbage Patch dolls were built at that time. So for the family, they had to craft a Black doll in order to use. These were both designed artifacts that were used in order to test and see the results. It was basically a focus group test that designers use today. So for me, it's more a matter of, okay, now that I understand the treatment of material, now that I understand the selection of typefaces, the selection of color, a lot of signs of segregation, regardless of the country that they're in, they also don't have color in them. They're just primarily Black and white. All of these things seem to be an echoed system, in the same way that there's a way in which we use Helvetica or Baskerville and or Trojan, which is a typeface that's commonly used for movie posters. Like, there's a way in which we understand what it's doing when it's used in a particular way, and sometimes we don't even question it. So for me, reading these things and being so ingrained in that history growing up, and now it really helps me to better, understand how these design artifacts impact us.
Every time we talk, the time goes by ridiculously fast. I'm like, what do you mean? It's 3 minutes to the hour. I could go on and on, but I want to be respectful of everyone who is in attendance and their time. So Tasnim, thank you for our last question. This has been such a great conversation. It always is, Omari. We've dropped the title, but I'm going to put it in the chat again, just to make sure that it's there. And even more exciting, we're giving away 2 books right now. And so Chris, as you can see with her bowl and her names in the bowl, is going to pull out 2 names, and we're going to find out who's getting these 2 books from the book giveaway that we're doing.
Charles, congratulations.
Talk about old school.
I'm old and I'm in school. And Tasmin.
All right.
All right. And please take a look in the chat. Both of you get my email address. Please send me your mailing address and we'll get the books out to you. Congratulations.
All right.
Thank you guys so much.
I'm excited
Thank
about
you,
it.
Omari.
Thank
I
you so
appreciate
much,
you guys for
Omari.
having me.
If we want to stay in contact with you, Omari, where can people like follow you? LinkedIn? What's your preferred method?
I mean, I would give you guys my email, but it probably would get buried. So I would say like Instagram or LinkedIn are like the easiest ways to reach me.
It will get buried. So I'm just going to tell you, I just emailed you. So you
Oh my
should
God.
in your inbox when you before you go
I'm
on
gonna
to
have to,
something else.
yeah. I mean, especially the State of Black Design Conference is like next week, and like
Oh,
I
yes, yes. And
I
so you
have
said
like a
your
million.
LinkedIn?
LinkedIn works, Instagram also works too.
Okay, I'm gonna
Um,
go ahead and drop those so people in attendance have them. Let's see, Omari
You have a
Souza.
virtual piece of that conference, right?
yes, yes.
All right.
The conference is also virtual.
So we should make sure to send that to the list of folks who signed up for this, Alasia.
Yes, please.
Maybe you can point me in the right direction and I'll do that.
So
Awesome. Yeah.
I just dropped Omari's LinkedIn and Instagram, so you can find him there. And this is our last Ask Me Anything for Diversify by Design of 2025. The year has come and gone. And I want to say, Omari, we kicked off the year with you and we're ending the year with you. I think you were our first AMA.
Hey.
You
So
you bookended the year.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much to everyone who is in attendance tonight. We appreciate you. Shout out to Charles and Tasnim for winning copies of the book. Definitely to everyone who's in attendance, go get your copy. I'm going to Amazon.com right now after this because I'm like, how can I not after that amazing conversation? So thank you all so much.
Yeah.
And we will see you at our next Ask Me Anything in 2026.